And I just remember that moment of like realizing that I wasn't paralyzed. I felt my neck to see if I had a trach, and no trach was there. And I'm all drugged up and just woke up and like felt this immense joy, even though I was like so physically exhausted. I couldn't even express the joy that I felt because I was intubated, so I couldn't communicate. So at this point, it is now 7 to 8 a.m., closer to like 7 or 7:30, I think, and this was one of the greatest days of my life. They had told me that I did so amazing throughout the night. They had actually worked on lowering the ventilator settings. They were confident that I was ready to be extubated, which exceeded all of our expectations because they had prepared me to be extubated for at least 48 hours. They felt that the surgery went well enough that I didn't come out with a emergency tracheostomy, trach placement. So, which I did not come out with a trach. And so, like I mentioned, the original plan, or what they prepared me for, was to be intubated for a minimum of 48 hours, and they were going to determine how I was doing after that and if I was ready to be extubated. However, the night went so amazing from a respiratory standpoint that I was ready to be extubated that morning. So my surgery was on December 23rd, 2020, my spinal fusion surgery. And then I was extubated on Christmas Eve, December 24th at around 7:30 a.m. And it was one of the greatest moments of my life. I was also absolutely terrified, though, because I was told by multiple members of my healthcare team that this moment of extubation would most likely not be possible for me after this kind of surgery. And so to be in that moment already less than 24 hours after the biggest surgery of my life, the biggest medical ordeal of my life, and here I am already exceeding their expectations and doing 10 times better than any of us ever expected me to do from a respiratory standpoint, was unbelievable. It was difficult for me to even comprehend that I was already being extubated. So when you get extubated, there's a whole entire team, and especially for me because I am high risk, and like I said, I didn't even know that this moment would ever come, let alone less than 24 hours after the biggest surgery of my life. That was a total miracle that we were going to even attempt this, that they felt I was doing so well that they felt that I was ready. And so the time comes, and there's a whole entire team that comes in, because in case something does go wrong, and as in wrong, I mean that the lungs aren't ready to be extubated and they have to quickly reinsert the tube. There has to be an entire team to be able to assist with this. And it was really interesting this time. So I was, of course, in the pediatric ICU unit, and also on this unit there are COVID patients, and also because they're dealing with the airway, specifically like the people that deal with the intubations and extubations, because they're dealing with the airway specifically, even though I obviously tested negative for COVID before my surgery. They were in this entire gear, almost like they were in the gear that they would be in if I were in a COVID unit. So they were entirely suited up because this was back in December. Obviously COVID is still here. It's always going to be here. It's a virus. It could still be in the air. And I was also, like I said, in the pediatric ICU unit. So there was actually COVID patients on my floor. Try to space us out and make sure that the same people aren't taking care of non-COVID patients as much as possible. But COVID was in my vicinity. They were all private rooms. Obviously I was not with anyone with COVID, but it is on the floor. And so to protect me and of course themselves, they were in this entire gear. I'll try to find a photo of some medical personnel on a COVID unit so you can see their gear, because it was identical to the photos that you see on the news of these people being suited up on a COVID unit. So they were in that same gear. So that was like, wow, I was not expecting that, because when I was previously intubated, when I had H1N1 in 2009, they didn't have all that gear when I was extubated. They weren't wearing all that gear. So that was like, well, they were like talking to me and like preparing me, and obviously I couldn't communicate until the tube came out. But I remember writing on my whiteboard, like, am I ready? Like, are my lungs ready? Something along those lines. I remember writing, like, I'm really scared. As I mentioned time and time again, this was a reality that I was told would most likely not be possible for me. And here we are doing the impossible once again. And so I was terrified, because I obviously trusted their judgment, but when you're told something isn't possible and then it happens, it's just a lot to comprehend. And I didn't want to be in the situation where my lungs weren't ready and then they would have to do an emergency re-intubation process. That would be incredibly traumatic. Obviously, they reassured me time and time again that I was ready. And so they reassured me, of course, that there's an entire team of people in here. Should I be not ready, should my lungs tell us something else when they pull the tube. And so it was so sweet. One of the nurses held my hand and they counted to 3, and on 3 they pulled the tube out, and I was then breathing on my own. I remember both times, actually, the person that extubated me said, like, it was one of their smoothest extubation processes. They're used to dealing with kids. Obviously, even like some adults are really traumatized by the process. But again, it also helped knowing that I was going to wake up intubated, and I had been intubated while awake before, so I quickly remembered what it was like. And so at no point during the night did I try to pull the tube, did I try to mess with the tube. I didn't touch it. I wasn't like fidgety. I was literally just chilling, and they're like, you're the most chill intubation patient we've ever had. Like, I was literally just okay with chilling with the tube in there, because I knew that it was part of the process. And in the hope of being one step closer to being extubated, I of course didn't expect for it to come as quick as it did, and that was such a huge miracle. And so when they pulled the tube on 3 and the tube was out and it went incredibly smooth, they did not have to reinsert the tube. I was breathing on my own, I was oxygenating well, I was just doing amazing. And even though I was extubated, they immediately put me on my BiPAP because I still needed some type of respiratory support, because I had just been extubated and I had just underwent a massive surgery. And so they immediately had the BiPAP ready for me to be back on it. It's what I'm used to at home, and so it was mine from home. Glad to have that, and I'll insert some pictures if I have not already I immediately took a selfie after I was extubated. You can tell in my eyes I am incredibly exhausted. Also, my eyes are very swollen in the photos because I was laying on my stomach for about 10 hours the previous day, so my face was like really squished from laying on my face for 10 hours. And so I don't look it, but I am in this photo filled with so much joy. It was also the first time that I actually got to see myself without my halo, and that was pretty surreal because it felt like just like that, the halo was gone. Just having that tube out and knowing that God had given me yet another miracle, and He had done what was again deemed potentially most likely impossible by so many people. I didn't need respiratory support. Like, I had my BiPAP, but like I was breathing on my own. My lungs were fully functioning, and it was one of the greatest moments of my life. The joy that I felt once that tube was out and I was successfully breathing on my own is a joy that I will never ever be able to put into words, and I will remember that moment for the rest of my life. And my voice was still kind of gone because I'd been intubated for so long, but I texted my mom the photo and she was just super excited. It was still a little bit hard for me to communicate again because my voice was coming back slowly, but I was able to say some words, and it's just really surreal, and I was grateful to be able to communicate better to my nurses and just all around. That was the extubation process. It was incredibly surreal. I did not expect it to come as soon as it did, as quickly as I did. Less than 24 hours after my surgery was complete, and I was already extubated against all odds, and such a miracle and a gift that I never take for granted, and I will never take for granted, because I know not everyone is as fortunate to receive that miracle that I did. This was Christmas Eve that I was extubated. I had talked to my friend Morgan and her boyfriend Eric. Shortly after I was extubated, I texted her and was like, I'm extubated, and because she was there when they told us that I would most likely be intubated for 48 hours. And so I immediately texted her and we FaceTimed. I did not have a lot of energy. Obviously, I was incredibly exhausted, heavily medicated on lots of pain medication, but it was so good to see her and hear from Eric how my surgery went, and it was just a really great moment. I'm grateful for friends that put me on during that process and walked with me as best they could from afar, despite the circumstances. And I think a lot of people ask me what the most difficult part of this process was, and honestly, it was going through this during pandemic status and pandemic restrictions. Obviously, when we made this decision that it needed to be done when it needed to be done, none of us could have ever expected that it was going to happen during a pandemic. But scoliosis doesn't stop progressing because of a virus, and that's just the reality. And so the hardest part for me was just going through this so alone. Like, yes, there's FaceTime like we did, and yes, there's phone calls and all of that, but it is not the same. And I thrive with being with people, and so to have to go through the most difficult and painful days of my life essentially alone was absolutely horrific. I'm trying to decide how I want to go about this and what I want to say, but I'm thinking about doing a video of the dangers of leaving a patient alone in a healthcare setting, because during this COVID times there was a lot that was done wrong to people trying to combat this, and it was the first time that anything like this had ever been done. Certainly wasn't the first pandemic. Like, H1N1 was obviously a pandemic, but measures like this weren't taken during that time. There was a lot that was done wrong, and one of those was the vulnerability of patients in the hospital, because people still need medical care besides pandemic care, if that makes sense. I would say that that was the most difficult part for me through this process, was just alone. Overall, it was the most difficult part. I'm going to chat with you guys about another barrier that I faced. Now that I'm finished talking about the extubation process, I want to talk about kind of what happens next and everything like that. So hours go by. I, as I said, got extubated on Christmas Eve, but it was like during the day and in the morning. And about 4 hours after I was extubated, 4 or 5 hours after, my surgeon came to see me, and she was the one that really, well, there was a lot of people, but she was the one that really prepared me to be intubated for at least 48 hours. And so she was so overjoyed to see me extubated when she walked in the room, because when she came to see me, I don't know if she knew that I was already extubated. Like before she came in the room, I didn't know if she expected to see me extubated or if they knew. If somebody told her that I got extubated, I don't know. But the look on her face when she walked in the room and saw me already extubated against all odds, and everything that we had expected was absolutely amazing. And the smile on her face during that moment was something I'll never forget. And it was in that moment that we could both quite literally breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that, you know, once I woke up from surgery that previous night on December 23rd, and I woke up and I realized that I hadn't been paralyzed and that I didn't have a trach. I mean, ultimately I knew it went well, but extubation was gonna be like really that moment that solidified this reality for me. That was just a really great moment to finally see my surgeon after my surgery and to get to talk to her about how the day went. And I had so many questions because it was just completely, my mind was just completely overwhelmed and filled with joy because of the outcome. And I'll insert a picture of us here. And I asked if we could take a picture together because, again, in that moment, it was in that moment that I knew I'd made it. It was in that moment of extubation and seeing her that I knew God pulled me through. A miracle had happened. A literal medical miracle happened before our eyes. And I had exceeded all expectations. Less than 24 hours after the biggest surgery of my life, and filled with so many risks based on my circumstances. We talked about the surgery and how it went. She talked to me about how they did the spinal cord monitoring and how there was, a lot of the surgery prep is getting you hooked up to all these monitors, and I had an arterial line and several IVs and all these different things. So the spinal cord monitor alerts her if she's getting too close to one of my nerves or if one of the nerves becomes triggered, and then she can stop, and then it alerts her to stop, and they can readjust whatever they're doing so that to prevent me from becoming paralyzed. And so the alarm never went off, meaning my nerves did not get angry, sustained full spinal cord function throughout the whole surgery, throughout the whole 10 hours. And she did say there was like a little beep, like it wasn't the typical beep where like one of the nerves had been hit. It just alerted her that they were getting too close for comfort to one of my nerves, and so it did beep at that moment, but she just redirected and they took care of that, and that was the only alarm that went off in terms of the spinal cord monitoring. And then I also asked her how much blood I needed, so if I needed a transfusion, because I was going to be open for so long and the surgery was going to take so long, it was clear that I would need, or so we thought, that I would need a blood transfusion. I think I've only ever needed, I don't know if I've ever needed one during a surgery. I think maybe one time, and then also when I had H1N1, I needed a blood transfusion because even though I wasn't bleeding out, they kept having to test my blood so often, I started to run out of blood. Those were the only times in my life that I ever needed a transfusion. So I was confident by what everybody told me and other friends of mine that have went through with the surgery that I too would need a blood transfusion. And so I asked her, I've never had issues with blood transfusion, but I was just curious how much blood I ended up needing. And it was with a smile on her face that she said, you actually did not need a blood transfusion. That was another thing that just blew my mind. I just remember saying to her, no way. Are you serious? I didn't even need a blood transfusion? And she said, no, you did absolutely amazing. She just reiterated to me that there were all these, that they just continued to be in awe of how I was doing. And from a respiratory standpoint, again, that was our biggest thing. Their biggest thing, I was sleeping. I got to do the easy part. Their biggest thing to be on alert for was my respiratory system. And I did not once go into any type of distress. She just made sure to tell me over and over how amazed they were and how amazed they were of how strong I maintained throughout the whole surgery. There were no wild surprises. In terms of the elephant in the room of how much correction we were able to maintain, I about fell off my chair or off the bed because I didn't expect to get any. And to be honest, my surgeons, both my neurosurgeon and my orthopedic surgeon, the one that primarily did the surgery is my orthopedic surgeon, she did it all. The neurosurgeon was just there, like, in case, you know. We all went into this with the expectation of very little, if any, correction. But I really didn't have any expectations. Our goal was stabilization to prevent my curve from getting any worse than it was, since I was doing so well medically despite the severe curve that I had. And when she showed me the x-ray, I about fell off the bed. I couldn't believe how many pieces of hardware there were, and I also couldn't believe how much correction that we got, and it's still really, really severe. I still am in the classification of incredibly severe scoliosis. I let it progress to the point that and I still have no regrets about that. People ask me if I have any regrets about it, about waiting, now that I'm kind of on the other side of this, and seeing how well it went. And I still have no regrets about waiting until it progressed to this point to do it, because there were medical reasons as to why I waited as long as I did. I was not medically strong enough to undergo a surgery like this. During childhood, my bones were not as strong as they are now. I was a lot weaker from a respiratory standpoint and just a lot of different factors. I did a video about that and why I waited so long to address my severe scoliosis, so I'll link that here. I always forget what side, but no, I have no regrets. Despite how happy I am that we were able to achieve some correction, like, obviously I still wish we would have gotten more. Just seeing still how severe it is, obviously I still wish we could have gotten more. I would have always wanted more, but the reality is the tipping point that my scoliosis was at, like, we could only get what we could get, and it was more than we expected to get, or more than I expected to get. I don't know what their goal was, but obviously, again, our main goal was stabilization, and we actually got correction, so we got improvement. And I will go ahead and reveal to you what she showed me that morning. So this is what my curve looks like now. I've done a comparison so you can see before and after. The before picture is pre-halo. I didn't have a copy with me to show you guys of what my spine looked like right before during towards the end of traction when I got x-rays. I didn't have a copy with me to show you guys what that looked like, so the before picture was even before halo. So I did get some correction with the halo. Obviously I got quite a bit. This is what my spine looks like now, and I warned you guys, it's still incredibly severe. I am still classified as having incredibly severe scoliosis. I did not go into this with the expectation of perfection. Had I done that, I would have just set myself up for pure disappointment. Like, obviously, when you go into a circumstance like this, you cannot expect perfection. But I really was and continue to be amazed at the amount of correction that I got, and that my surgeon was able to do. She's absolutely incredible, and God truly used her to do the impossible, because I was not expecting any correction. So as you can see there, you can see all the hardware. I knew there was going to be a lot of hardware, but it really took me by surprise when I saw the picture. We talked about that, and then I think I mentioned too, she told me that they were able to connect me to traction, during the surgery, so that was huge in lessening my risks, and it definitely did. I came out great. So now I want to talk about one of the biggest barriers that I faced with this surgery as opposed to any of my other surgeries, and that is pain management. So, pain management for me is very tricky. It's always been. I am allergic to a ton of different things, pretty much any strong pain medication I'm allergic to. There's only strong pain medications that I can think of that I can have are really strong, but obviously you can only have those in hospital. And then there's one stronger-ish one that I have when I'm home, like after a major surgery, and that's it. Like, that's all I can have. Everything else I'm severely allergic to, like projectile vomiting. I'm sorry if that's TMI. Tachycardia. Projectile vomiting and tachycardia is like the two main side effects that I get from really strong pain medications. And there's one you'll hear in another part, this is on to another part of the story, but I did end up having 2 spinal surgeries. So the second one, I was accidentally given one that was on my allergy list, which was a huge no-no. It was the first time that's ever happened. But that one actually, I had like a new side effect with that one that I had never had before, and I started getting really lightheaded. And so those are kind of some of the side effects that I get. But we've found a regimen that has worked for me for many, many years, and it's never been a problem. And so going into this, we're all in agreement. We're gonna do the same thing. I was nervous because I knew that this surgery, in terms of pain, was going to be unlike anything I had ever experienced. And this is something that I haven't touched on in any of these spinal fusion videos, is the pain. And I knew it was going to be off the charts, but literally nothing could have prepared me for the amount of pain that I would experience. I'm going to touch on this in a separate part of this video, a separate part of the series, but there was one night that I was screaming out, like screaming, crying, like absolutely hysterical, and I'm yelling out that I wanted to be medically sedated. I have never once done that in my life. Never once have I yelled out that I want to be medically sedated, but I was in such a state of true suffering. I felt like I could not go on anymore. It was too much to bear. I felt like I could not withstand. My body was so tired of being in fight mode, of dealing with this overwhelming pain that took over my whole body. I felt like I couldn't go another minute. I did not end up getting medically sedated, obviously. Well, not obviously, you wouldn't know. That's again for another story. But the pain throughout this whole ordeal was really, really hard to get a grip on. And my pain tolerance is really, really high. But there were moments during this hospital stay, during these 28 days, where I sobbed because I was in a state of true suffering. I'd never, other than getting the pin replaced in my halo, I had never felt pain like I had during the surgery. And I felt so weak, mentally weak, because I was like, this should not affect me this much, because this was an entirely different kind of pain. I'd never had back surgery before, and your back really supports everything in your body, everything. So every time you move your arm, every time you move your head, your back moves, and you can't like move your back to position it in a certain way. Yes, you can roll side to side, but it's not like an arm where, like, if my arm is fractured, I could like prop it up or move it to the side or have it close to me, like my back, like it's just there. When my surgeon came in the day after, or the day I was extubated, she had told me and what had happened during the surgery, what they discovered, and it really gave me a lot of answers as to why this pain was taking me over so much more than it typically does. Like I said, my pain tolerance is really high, and this was really, really unique. I was heavily medicated when she did this and when she explained this to me, so I really don't quite understand it, but I'll try to explain it the best that I know how. Basically, when they first started to opened up my back, they noticed that the pain receptors in my back were not responding well. Like, they were not overactive. And I think because something with my heart rate or something, like they had barely gotten started and my body was giving them signs that I was in an insane amount of pain. My surgeon has done dozens of surgeries on me, and so she knows me and knows my pain tolerance, and so she knew that like something wasn't, they had to continue the surgery. So they managed the pain during the surgery the best that they could, but again my body kept giving them signs that I was responding to pain differently than I had in previous surgery. Her and the pain management team, they explained to me that my pain receptors in my back are overactive, and for some people their pain receptors, I think it's called pain receptors, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, but they are overactive, meaning they don't work properly and don't respond to pain medication appropriately. Like, pain medication is not enough to combat the pain, if that makes sense. That's why all she had done was open my back, and I was already responding in this way. And for some people, when their pain receptors don't function properly, it's usually throughout their entire body. But I've never had issues with unmanageable pain or my body giving signs during surgery that I'm in an insane amount of pain. I've never had that, but my surgeon did say that for some people it can be, these overactive pain receptors can be in one specific area of your body, and so for me they're in my back. And I'd never had back surgery before, so obviously we didn't know this. But that's also interesting because it must just be a surgery component, because like I mentioned to you guys during this whole journey is I didn't suffer with any kind of, or endure really any kind of back pain ever throughout my whole life, and with this curve you would not expect that. And so it has something to do with the surgery component within my back, with the pain receptors, because like day to day I never experienced, like I would get like towards the end there, before I had my halo and everything, like when I really started to address my scoliosis and like make a plan, notice the progression, I started noticing like discomfort. But I was never in insane amounts of pain. I wasn't in any pain actually, which is pretty unusual given the severity of my curve. That whole pain receptor thing is still really puzzling to me and my team as well, but I had to work with it. There's nothing that you can do to fix the pain receptors if they don't function properly, and so we just had to manage that the best as they could. From the minute I woke up from surgery on the 23rd till the whole first 2 weeks, whenever they would ask me, a scale of 1 to 10, how bad is your pain? Like, I remember like the 23rd, when I first woke up, I literally wrote 30. Like, I literally wrote 30. To know that here I am enduring like the biggest surgery of my life and learning that my pain receptors in my back, when disrupted by surgery, don't function properly and don't respond to pain management well, was really, really defeating, because it just made the recovery and it made the management that much more difficult. So we talked about that for a little while, and I remember like thanking her for everything. It was just an amazing moment to talk to her, that we had made it. This whole first week I'm still in the ICU, the pediatric ICU. Could not get a grip on my pain management whatsoever. I was really just it knocked me down. I really felt like I just couldn't fight it, and that was really defeating. I was hooked up to a button, like a pain button, so every time I felt pain I could click the button, and it doesn't OD you, even though I'm always afraid of that. I don't know why. But it doesn't OD you, but it's a way for you to kind of have more control of managing your pain and getting it as soon as you can. So I was in the intensive care unit for the first full week. Expected me to be in there for 3 to 5 days, but once we discovered that my pain receptors were not functioning properly when disrupted by surgery, my team quickly realized that I was struggling. It ended up being a blessing in disguise, because had I left 3 to 5 days later, as scheduled, I would have ended up needing to come back, which I'll get into. I did not eat for the first 3 days, 4 days, I don't know. When I'm in a lot of pain too, my stomach like completely shuts down. I feel no ounce of hunger. So I was on a like glucose water with sugar basically to sustain me until I was able to eat something. I lost a couple pounds while I was inpatient that first week. During the whole admission, I lost a couple pounds because I wasn't eating. I couldn't eat. I was in so much pain. So that was just another layer. And then a few days after my surgery, I had to go downstairs to get x-rays because the spinal x-rays, they can't bring the machine to the room because you have to sit in the special chair. When you're in ICU and you're experiencing as much pain as I did, they have an entire transport team that will come and like take you, because I had to be on my BiPAP because all these pain medications can also suppress your respiratory system. And so I was like really just needed that extra support. They took me down with a whole transport team to help manage like my oxygen and my BiPAP and my pain pump. Having to get maneuvered and moved as much as I did to get those x-rays were really, really difficult. It was so much pain. And yeah, so that was interesting. But we got them and things still looked good. At this point, I was pretty much just in because pain management was out of control. Absolutely out of control. But at least we knew why. So that first week, I just slept on and off. I barely ate. My parents had to like call up to the floor to get updates because I was not on my phone. I didn't even make my first Instagram post to update you guys until January 1st, literally New Year's Day. So that whole first week, I was not on my phone. I was not able to make posts because I was so weak and in so much pain and sleeping so much. Christmas Day, I woke up for a few minutes, tried to put on my favorite Christmas movie, The Polar Express, but I fell asleep and I slept the whole day. I slept the entire Christmas. They had a special like Christmas meal, but obviously I slept through that. I couldn't eat anything. And so yeah, I slept the entire Christmas. I think I woke up long enough to wish my parents and Austin Merry Christmas. And I just slept the whole day. Like the third day was really worse than the second day, because the second day I was just on this like adrenaline high from like the excitement of knowing that I had already been extubated. But the third day I was out of it. I was completely out of it. And so everybody was just amazing. Like my ICU team was incredible. Like the nurses were incredible. There were these 2 nurses that I had, specifically 3 nurses in the ICU that were just incredible. They would like sit in my room and just like talk to me and like get to know me as a person and not just a patient. And we've developed a really great friendship, and it was just really nice. And they knew I was alone, and so just everybody, like my entire care team was just incredible. Like God really placed the best people in my team. The whole hospitalization, I only had 1 bad nurse. It wasn't till towards the end. And for 28 days, 1 bad nurse is like pretty good, and I have pretty high standards. This is the part now that I've kind of told you the extubation process and the outcome of my surgery and all of that. This is where there's really not much to update on because I slept. And they would come every morning and like change my dressing. Oh, the day after though too. So I had drains in my back. They put drains in after to like, I was like bleeding out, you know. Not like terribly, but they put drains in my back, and then I think the second day is when I got it out. And then the 3rd or 4th, maybe 5th day, I got my catheter out. The drains out were not as bad as I thought it would be. I had never had drains of any type. But my friend Morgan and Brenda like continued to check up on me even though they couldn't be there a lot of the time. They were really stingy on visitors. But once I got to the stable floor is when I really voiced my concern on the whole visitor thing. That'll be in the next video as well. We'll kind of get into that. As much as I was like suffering and in a lot of pain, I was still just really happy with how well everything went. Every morning they would come at like, these residents would come at like 6 a.m. and like do my dressing. And then the biggest part of this as well, this is probably where I'm going to end off this video. I'll talk about. So during my surgery, I was given a bone graft. So I had a tissue transplant done during my surgery. So part of the fusion, they used rods, screws, and a bone graft, a tissue transplant. And so another thing that my surgeon had told me, and I knew that this would be a possibility as well. But what I didn't know is that this bone graft came from deceased organ donor. This is a part of the journey that is really, really special for me. We've all heard of organ donation, but you never expect it to be you until you're in that situation. And my surgeon was explaining this to me, but what's really cool about tissue transplant, the bone graft, they use a part of the bone that doesn't have any cells. So they don't have to find me a particular match. I can use any bone graft, doesn't have any cells. They don't need to find me a match because the body can't reject it because there's no cells. So one thing I mentioned throughout this whole process is how it's taken a village to truly get me to the point that I'm at today. But I never expected an organ donor. Somebody either made the selfless decision while they were alive and well, or somebody's family had to make the unthinkable decision after the sudden loss of a loved one on whether they should donate their loved one's body to organ and tissue donation. And even though the donation that I received was not a major organ, like a heart, a pair of lungs, a kidney, a liver, it wasn't a major organ. But without this bone graft, my fusion would not have been successful. We needed that. There was a reason that my surgeon utilized that. And bone graft is used as a bridge. Over time, the donor bone will have disintegrated and it generates my own bone growth. So eventually I will have my own bone growth back in my spine, but without the donor bone, without the tissue transplant, my fusion would not have been successful. An organ donor, somebody's loved one, helped be the part to save my life. And that is just, there's so many moving parts to this. At 22 years old, I never expected for transplant to be a part of my story. I never expected an organ donor to be a part of my story. I am a registered organ donor, and I encourage you guys to do the same because you never know whose life you can save. I'm gonna get into this in the next video as well. My battery's almost dead. I had the chance to write a letter to my donor family. Donation, the family does not have to write back. From this day forward, I have not heard from my donor family. I don't know if they ever wanted to read my letter, but I just wanted to give them thanks. And the organization called 125 Lives gives recipients the opportunity to write a letter to their donor family. And I'll share in the next video how that process came to be. This video is already very long and my battery's almost dead. I am going to end this part of my spinal fusion series. There'll be another video on the series next, but this was just a lot of the extra details. The next video that you'll see is when things really took a turn quite quickly. If you follow me on Instagram, you already know, but if you don't follow me on Instagram, the first week of January, I started losing feeling in my arms and legs very slowly. With the spinal cord, there's a risk of becoming paralyzed, but if I were to become paralyzed from the surgery, it would have happened immediately during the surgery, not a week. This is where that all happens, and I'll share more about being a tissue transplant recipient and about that, but this is the day after my surgery and just the details that came with that and the details that my surgeon shared with me. It was one of the best days of my life, December 24th, the second best day of my life. It was honestly probably even better than the surgery itself. Well, I don't know, they're both tied because getting that tube pulled and being able to breathe on my own was what I had always hoped for, and I got that miracle. Now that the first 2 days of surgery I've told you guys about, next we'll go into kind of the recovery and what extended my stay so long. Again, that pain management, but what happened during 3 weeks. So that's only 1 week. The first week in intensive care unit, that's only 1 week. So what happened during those other 3 weeks, I will share with you guys in the next part of this series. You guys have to understand that this was a true medical miracle, and I know it's because not only, you know, God's goodness, but also He heard your prayers and praises for him and prayers for me. I can't thank you guys enough for praying for this miracle, and it's because of your support and love and prayers also that I got through this as well as I did. I continue to be in awe of this miracle every day, and it's a gift that I don't take for granted, and I can't wait to share with you what comes next in this very difficult but very rewarding journey as I remained in the hospital for 3 additional weeks.